So, as you know, Donald Trump has been making his rounds through the Middle East, and he went to Saudi Arabia, Qatar yesterday, and today he is in Abu Dhabi, where he visited the UAE, and he has been extracting investments from them, and they're very happy to do so. Obviously, the Gulf is more excited about appeasing Trump than they were with Joe Biden. But it doesn't matter who the president is. When you visit to the Middle East, you are adorned with gifts. That's part of the hospitality of the Arabs, especially the Gulf Coast Arabs. But when it comes to the president of the United States, the most powerful person on earth, leading the most powerful, largest empire, those kinds of gifts can be quite lavish. In the case of Qatar, they gave Donald Trump, as you know, a $400 million private Boeing jet. It's a 747 that has essentially been converted into a flying palace. And the reason why they did this is just as a gift. A lot of people thought this was a bribe, but this was just a cherry on top. $400 million sounds like a lot of money, and it is. It's 4 times the amount that Miriam Adelson, the pro-Israel, actually she is Israeli, but she's an Israel first dual citizen. She lives in the United States. She's the wife of the late casino mogul Sheldon Adelson. And she famously gave about $114 million to Donald Trump for his election campaign in 2024. But she also funded him pretty heavily in 2016 and 2020, actually. So she's a big-time giver. But Qatar, in one gift, gave more money than she gave through the last 3 election cycles. So it's a lot of money, and it's just a cherry on top. As you'll see, I'm going to explore some of the investments Qatar made in Donald Trump personally as an individual, but also in the United States. And that was just Qatar alone. We're not even including Saudi Arabia in the UAE. So yeah, they gave him this private jet. So let's go ahead and watch this video together. I want you guys to get a sense of, the background about this private jet. So let's go ahead and take a look here.
Is poised to accept, President Trump says the U.S. government is poised to accept an airplane from Qatar valued at nearly $400 million. He explained on social media, the Defense Department is getting a gift, free of charge, of a 747 aircraft to replace the 40-year-old Air Force One. The announcement has raised ethical and national security concerns. We're joined now by Kathleen Clark, an expert in legal and government ethics and professor at Washington University School of Law in St. Louis. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So President Trump today, he called the offer of this airplane. He said it was a nice gesture that would be stupid to turn down. And the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, reportedly said in a memo that this was perfectly legal because it was a donation. Bondi, we should say, worked as a foreign lobbyist for Qatar. What questions does all of this raise for you?
This appears to be an illegal, unconstitutional payoff from a foreign government to the president at a scale we actually have never seen, on the order of $400 million.
You use the word payoff. Why?
I use the word payoff because it implies corruption, and that's what we're talking about here. Our founders put into our Constitution a prohibition.
Okay, boring. I don't want to hear the rest of it. The idealistic, romanticized, our founders never allowed for blah, blah, blah. This is something that's been going on for a very long time. But she's right. This was basically a bribe, which is very standard, of course. And I'm not belittling that. I just don't care about it because it's the way the world works, right? So, but it's actually a lot more than just a bribe. This is essentially a tax, and what many Muslims call a jizya, okay? It's basically the submission of the weaker states to the empire. So you come to visit us and we bestow upon you our tax. So thank you for letting us exist, for not destroying us. Thank you for protecting our governments, and thank you for giving us access to Western markets, because as you know, Qatar, and this isn't just about Qatar, of course, the entire region, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, they make a ton of money off natural gas and oil, but they don't have as much oil as their next door neighbor, Iran, and they definitely don't have as much oil and gas as Venezuela. Okay, Venezuela has like trillions of dollars of oil and gas, but those two countries are poor. Why is that in comparison to Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the UAE? Well, it's because they've been sanctioned. They are punished because they don't give access to Western companies to come and exploit their resources. And so as punishment, they're sanctioned, which basically means they're not given access to the wealthy Western consumer markets that need a ton of energy. So Qatar is a lot wealthier, Saudi Arabia is a lot wealthier, and the UAE is a lot wealthier because they do have access to these markets. And so when the president comes to visit them, they bestow upon them a bunch of gifts, and they try to, of course, compete for influence. And the way they do that is just by dumping as much money as they can into the American economy, into the president individually, themselves, etc., etc. So let's go ahead and take a look at the sort of interior. So this is the interior of the private jet. This is not really confirmed. I saw this reported on The Guardian, but we're going to go ahead and share it anyway. Whether it looks like exactly like this or not, these are some of the images of the interior. So as you can see, it's like, pretty much a 4-star or 5-star type hotel. In comparison to the 45-year-old Air Force One, this is a bit of an upgrade, and Donald Trump is very happy to accept it. And so this woman is taking this opportunity in this interview to criticize Donald Trump. But of course, she probably never said anything about Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and Ukraine and all the money they made there. And so, yeah. So the interior design is crazy. Master bedrooms and guest rooms and private lounges. And it's just like a flying casino, basically. Well, it has the Zionists kind of freaking out a bit. They're bothered by the reports, whether they're real or staged, if it's political theater or not. The Zionists are concerned about Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the UAE gaining influence over Donald Trump because they have more to offer economically than Israel does. So they're worried that Netanyahu is being pushed to the side because of the fact that the genocide is dragging on and Trump wants to address other items on his agenda. And so he wants to move on already. But Netanyahu is, dragging his feet. And for whatever reason, whether because it's in Israel's interest or his own political career, he won't bring an end to this. And so there are these reports that they're getting sidelined. And so Zionist accounts, like here you can see the Mossad, satirical and awesome account. They're a pretty large Zionist account. They have this hashtag #FQatar. And they're very bothered by the kind of influence Qatar has. Here you're seeing Mark Levin. Mark Levin is a Jewish Zionist, a Israel first dual citizen. He was recently appointed to the Trump administration, not out of talent or merit, but out of pure connections. This guy is a privileged Zionist who's a idiot, really, but he's had his own talk show for so long on conservative radio and then on Fox News. And so he was appointed recently to the Trump administration in some bullshit role. And he says here, Saudi Arabia played a significant role in the 9/11 slaughter of our people. I didn't hear this crown prince even apologize once yesterday for what they did to us. And I know the 9/11, he's just yapping. He's upset at Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE because they're gaining influence, whether it's real or perceived, recently with Trump. And so it's freaking them out. Well, the Trump administration isn't freaked out at all. This is Carolyn Levitt, the press secretary for Trump. And she's cheesing. She's so happy with the Air Force One behind her. She's like, next stop Qatar, because everywhere they go, they're getting goodies. Like it's a really fun and exciting trip. They go to Saudi Arabia and they get a brand new jet and they get all these investments and blah, blah, blah. And then they go to Qatar and they go to UAE where they get a hand job and they get everything that they want. So she's very excited to go. And she's cheesing with Stephen Chung. And so the whole Trump administration is just having a blast. This isn't work. This is fun for them. This is play. And yeah, it's their turn in charge and they're reaping the benefits. And so what are those benefits? So Suleiman Ahmed here tweeted, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth signs a defense cooperation between the U.S. and Qatar. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, okay? First of all, Pete Hegseth is the guy who has the tattoo kafir, right, which is the Arabic word for disbeliever, on his body. And he positions himself as like a Judeo-Christian crusader. He hates Muslims. He's Islamophobic. He hates Arabs. But he's more than happy to come and sit down with an Arab and take their money because money talks, bullshit walks, as my friend says. So they signed a defense pact with Qatar. Now, why is this a big deal? Well, Qatar is a very small country. They don't have a large military. They don't really need a large military. Even if they had a bunch of fighter jets and rockets, they can't defend themselves from more powerful enemies, bigger enemies. Well, they're not really enemies, but let's say competitors like Iran, UAE, Saudi Arabia. As you know, back in 2017, they had a big political rift with Saudi Arabia. There was a concern that Saudi Arabia would invade. They couldn't militarily do so because of the influence Qatar has, which is the whole point of gifting Trump with all these different things and investing in the American economy in order to protect themselves, because if they didn't have that, MBS and Saudi Arabia would have invaded and gobbled up Qatar, but they couldn't do so because there's a U.S. base on their territory and because Qatar buys a bunch of things with all their money. And so, yeah, but even so, it's not the equipment itself that they buy, and it's not like they're engaged in war, right? But it's not the equipment that they buy that protects them. It's the fact that they buy it in the first place, because the U.S. will protect them like they did against Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago. And so let's take a look at some of the things, what else they did. So they not only purchased defense equipment, which we'll explore, they also purchased the largest ever order of Boeings. So, Qatar has Qatar Airways. For a very small country, Qatar actually has one of the best airlines in the world. They are routinely voted the #1 airline in the world, not only because of their amazing business class or first class, but also because their economy class is actually quite comfortable in comparison to other airlines. And so because they are subsidized by the government, they can provide better experience, and also they import cheap labor from like the Philippines and other places. And so you have very good English-speaking flight attendants, but they come from poorer countries and they're based in Qatar, and so they get paid less. And so the subsidies from the government, the low labor, they're able to provide a higher quality product, and so they service people all around the world. So Qatar Airways is rapidly growing, so they just decided to purchase a ton of Boeings, the largest ever order, $200 billion worth, according to the Cradle, from Boeing, which, as you know, has been mired with certain issues over their security and the quality of their airplanes, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a pretty big deal. And they also purchased MQ-9 drones. Now, I'll go into detail later about why this is interesting. Actually, I'll talk about it now. So the MQ-9 Reaper drone. This drone is famous. It's been in use for many years now, especially made very famous by the Obama administration. But this is a drone that was developed in 2000, so it's old technology. Okay, this is like 25 years old at this point, and maybe even older. And it's kind of outdated, and although it's impressive, it's not all that. Like the Houthis, Ansar Allah, in Yemen, was able to knock them down. So we'll talk about that in a brief second. I apologize. There's one more thing Qatar did. They invested personally, not just by giving Donald Trump a private palace to fly around in. They also invested in this stupid golf course, which we'll explore later. So they just endowed Trump and America with gifts. So let's take a look at the defense pact that I was telling you guys about. So Qatar signs agreement to go ahead with $2 billion worth of MQ-9 drones and $1 billion worth of counter-drone orders. And, of course, they ordered a bunch of other military equipment as well. Now, why is this a big deal? Because this comes off the heels of, look, the Qatari deals come on the heels of what the White House described as a monster agreement with Saudi Arabia for nearly $142 billion worth of defense deals, though few details were provided on what that entailed, and the language of the White House statement suggested they were still in the works. During Trump's first term, a massive defense deal with Saudi Arabia was also announced. So basically just telling you how much money has been spent on defense. And as I said, Qatar doesn't really need it, but they spend it, and it's the expenditure itself that protects them. So why is this interesting? It's interesting because, one, Qatar doesn't need the MQ-9 drone. Two, it's not a great product. Ansar Allah claims that they downed at least 16 of them just in the last 2 years. Okay, and Ansar Allah is not a sophisticated group. They're impressive. I'm not trying to belittle them, but when you compare them to states like UAE, Saudi Arabia, much larger populations, larger armies that are endorsed and sponsored and trained and protected and essentially allies of the United States, Ansar Allah is not really much in comparison, but they're able to down these kinds of drones. And so you would think Qatar will see that and say, this drone isn't all that, but they bought it anyway. Why? Because the purchase itself, like I said, the purchase itself is a tax to the empire. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's valuable or not. They could spend $10 billion on rubber bands. The rubber bands will do nothing for them. The point is the money itself tells America that Qatar is a player, and so you should protect them. And I'm not knocking Qatar. I actually like Qatar. Of all the Gulf countries, I think Qatar is the most preferable. I'm just telling you the way the game is played. So this is a map of Yemen, and so this is where, Ansar Allah has been knocking out these drones in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, these places.
Now
so
we will.
Let's watch this video of Trump and the Qatari Emir basically announcing the signing of these deals worth billions and billions of dollars.
See the signing of the agreement of buying aircraft from Boeing. His Excellency Badr bin Abdul Emir will sign from the Qatari side, and Kelly Altberg will be signing on behalf of Boeing.
Between the State of Qatar and the United States of America. Boeing purchase agreement signed on behalf of the State of Qatar by His Excellency Badr Mohammed Al-Mir.
Okay, so like I said, basically you have Donald Trump and the Emir of Qatar, and next to them is the CEO of Qatar Airways and the CEO of Boeing, and they're signing this epic deal for like $200 billion. It's the largest ever purchase of Boeing aircraft. So there's that. Okay, also, like I said, Qatar also invested in this silly little Trump golf course. So let's take a look here, and let me just read this quote to you. So, Qatar Diyar has signed an agreement with Dar Global to develop Trump International Golf Club, and they're calling it Samaisma. It includes a luxury 18-hole golf course, golf club, and an exclusive collection of Trump-branded luxury villas as part of the landmark Samaisma Coastal Project, 40 kilometers north of Doha. So let's watch this video that explains exactly what this project is, and pay attention to some key visual imagery that we'll return to that reveals a lot about what's happening here.
What a journey through time. Every story, every step is a narrative of growth. A celebration of what we can achieve when we dare to reach beyond. Welcome to Samaisma, an extraordinary new development that redefines luxury living, crafting our future today. We create a new moment.
Okay, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. I get it, it's just a commercial, but you know, flying through, it's like, first they say, when you dare to think of the future, and this is like us as a civilization progressing and advancing, and then they show you stupid bullshit, fake patches of grass and fake pools and fake lagoons and fake villas and fake grass so that super wealthy people can go and play in a patch of sand 40 kilometers north of Doha in Qatar. So, but, you know, the point is basically to gift or bribe or whatever you want to call it a bunch of money to Donald Trump. So this is Trump International signing the deal with them. You can see Trump's son, Eric Trump, here in the background. They're signing this big deal. They're very happy to do so because it's a ton of money. And then here he's being shown the stupid crap they're going to build for them. And he's like, oh, yes, thank you very much. You know, my dad hooked me up on this one. So let's read this quote from Eric Trump. He says, "We're incredibly proud to expand the Trump brand into Qatar through this exceptional collaboration with Qatari Diyar and Dar Global. Trump International Golf Club Samaisma and our luxury villa community will reflect our highest standards of quality, prestige, and timeless elegance." Blah, blah, blah. It's just another garbage project. You can take a look here. They have a Ferris wheel. Wow, that's nice. Look at behind it. They didn't even bother to like imagine what could be there in the future. It's just sand. And in the middle of the sand, there's going to be, you know, a decent coast of beach, and there's a Ferris wheel, and there's a little roller coaster for all the little rich billionaire kids so they can have a good time. And then they have like this like fake Disney and fake Arab Apple Store and fake Arab Moscow and an arch. And yeah, that's it. So pretty ridiculous. But I brought this up because I wanted you to just gain an understanding of how these kinds of things work. So Qatar purchases things they don't need, necessarily things that they don't even necessarily want, but it's in order to gain influence and leverage for their own national security, for them to achieve certain things. They spent hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. You'd think they would say, hey, we'll basically give you $1 trillion. Why don't you end the genocide of Gaza? Or why don't you force Israel to end the occupation, et cetera, et cetera. But for whatever reason, they aren't able to do that, or they aren't willing to do that, or both. We'll have to make a separate video about that one day. But the point is that they have all this money and they spend it in order to achieve certain things. To Qatar's credit, you know, through Al Jazeera, they've done a lot to advance the Palestinian narrative in the West, and also to preserve the story of the Palestinian people in the Nakba through all the different documentaries they've done. And so they hire a lot of Palestinian expats. So I'm not knocking Qatar. You know, I prefer them, like I said, over Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But they, they do spend a lot of money on useless crap, but they do that in order to survive.